Jean Lafitte, the pirate who never left New Orleans, the legendary pirate, vanished without a trace in the 1820s, but his restless spirit still haunts the city he saved from invasion. Louisiana holds its ghosts close, preserving them in the humid air that drifts through Spanish moss and settles over still water at dusk. The state understands that some presences refuse to depart, that certain individuals possess such force of character in life that their departure from the world requires documentation, closure, a confirmed ending. Without that ending, the spirit remains tethered to the geography it claimed as its own. This is the condition that defines one of New Orleans' most persistent hauntings, the restless presence of a man who dominated the Gulf Coast in the early 19th century and who disappeared from historical record without the courtesy of a documented death. His name was Jean Lafitte, and nearly 200 years after he sailed away from Galveston Island and failed to return, witnesses throughout southern Louisiana continue to report encounters with a tall figure in a dark coat who appears in locations that correspond exactly to the operational territory of the most famous pirate in American history. Jean Lafitte operated during the chaotic years when the Louisiana Territory transferred from French to Spanish to American control, when the boundaries between legal commerce and smuggling remained undefined, and when a man with sufficient nerve and organizational capacity could establish himself as an independent power in the bayous and barrier islands of the Gulf Coast. Lafitte commanded that nerve and that capacity. He established headquarters in New Orleans at a blacksmith shop on Bourbon Street that served as the public face of a sophisticated smuggling operation. He moved contraband through the intricate waterways of the Louisiana marshes, routes that only someone with intimate knowledge of tide and current could navigate successfully. He sold goods to New Orleans merchants at prices that undercut legal imports, and he did so with such efficiency and reliability that the city's commercial class considered him a valuable business partner rather than a criminal threat. Governor Claiborne did not share that assessment. The governor issued proclamations against Lafitte, offered rewards for his capture, and attempted to suppress the smuggling trade that operated openly through the bayous surrounding the city. Lafitte responded with characteristic audacity. He met with Claiborne in the narrow passageway behind St. Louis Cathedral, the alley that would later bear the name Pirates Alley in recognition of those clandestine negotiations. The meetings established a pattern that would define Lafitte's relationship with authority throughout his documented life. He operated outside the law, but he negotiated with those who represented it, and he maintained his autonomy through a combination of strategic value and personal force. That strategic value became undeniable in December 1814, when British forces approached New Orleans with the intention of capturing the city and controlling access to the Mississippi River. General Andrew Jackson commanded the American defense, but his force lacked sufficient ammunition, artillery, and trained gunners to mount an effective resistance. Lafitte possessed all three. The pirate met with Jackson and offered the resources of his organization in exchange for presidential pardons for himself and his men. Jackson accepted. On January 8, 1815, American forces defeated the British at the Battle of New Orleans in an engagement that established American control of the Gulf Coast and made Andrew Jackson a national hero. Lafitte's gunners and materials contributed decisively to that victory. President Madison issued the promised pardons. Jean Lafitte, pirate and smuggler, became Jean Lafitte, defender of New Orleans. The pardon did not transform Lafitte into a conventional citizen. He returned to the Gulf and established a new base of operations on Galveston Island, founding the community of Campeche and resuming the maritime activities that had made him wealthy and notorious. He operated in the Gulf through the late 1810s, commanding ships and men with the same efficiency that had characterized his Louisiana years. And then, sometime in the early 1820s, he departed Galveston on a voyage that multiple historical accounts reference, but none conclusively document. He sailed out, he did not return, no reliable witness recorded his death, no body was recovered, no grave bears his name. Jean Lafitte simply vanished from documented history, leaving behind a mystery that would fuel speculation and legend for the next 2 centuries. The absence of a confirmed death creates specific conditions in New Orleans' paranormal tradition. A spirit that does not receive proper burial, that leaves business unfinished, that disappears without resolution, remains tethered to the physical locations it occupied during life. Jean Lafitte meets every criterion for such tethering. His death remains undocumented. His burial site is unknown. The business he conducted in New Orleans and along the Gulf Coast continued long after his disappearance, carried forward by the networks he established and the routes he pioneered. And the city he saved in January 1815 never forgot him, never stopped telling stories about him, never released him from the cultural memory that keeps certain figures perpetually present. The first documented sightings of Lafitte's apparition appear in New Orleans' oral tradition within decades of his disappearance. Witnesses report encounters at the Bourbon Street blacksmith shop, the building that served as his operational headquarters during his New Orleans years. The apparition appears as a tall man in a dark coat, consistent with period descriptions of Lafitte's physical appearance and dress. The figure appears solid, three-dimensional, present in the physical space of the shop. Witnesses who see him assume he is another visitor until he vanishes, simply ceases to be there, leaving the witness staring at empty space where a man stood moments before. The phenomenon repeats at Pirates Alley, the narrow passage behind St. Louis Cathedral, where Lafitte met with Governor Claiborne. Tour guides leading groups through the French Quarter report seeing the figure standing in the alley, watching, and then gone. The timing of these appearances lacks pattern. The apparition does not manifest on schedule or in response to specific triggers. It appears when it chooses, observed by witnesses who frequently possess no prior knowledge of the location's connection to Jean Lafitte until they describe what they saw and someone explains the history. The sightings extend beyond the French Quarter into the bayou country south and west of New Orleans, the marsh territory through which Lafitte moved contraband during his smuggling years. Fishermen and hunters report encountering a tall figure in dark clothing standing on islands and shell ridges accessible only by boat, places where no casual visitor would appear. The figure watches them, does not respond to calls or waves, and disappears when they approach. The consistency of the description across multiple isolated locations suggests either a coordinated hoax of remarkable sophistication or genuine encounters with something that moves through the Louisiana wetlands using routes that Jean Lafitte knew intimately 200 years ago. Gulf Coast communities within Lafitte's former operational territory report similar phenomena. The apparition appears near water, in locations that correspond to documented landing sites and supply routes from the early 19th century. The figure stands at shorelines, watching the water, then turns and is no longer there. Local tradition identifies the apparition as Lafitte based on the combination of physical description and location, an identification made by witnesses who often learn only afterward that they stand in places the pirate frequented during his living years. Paranormal investigators who document French Quarter hauntings include the Bourbon Street blacksmith shop and Pirates Alley in their surveys. The building that houses Lafitte's former headquarters now operates as a bar, and staff members report experiences that match the historical pattern. A tall figure in period clothing observed in the building, present one moment and absent the next, never threatening, never aggressive, simply there and then not. The experiences occur frequently enough that staff members no longer find them remarkable. The pirate comes back to his bar, he always has. The investigation of Jean Lafitte's haunting relies primarily on witness testimony rather than technological documentation. The apparition does not appear on command. It does not manifest in response to investigative equipment or recorded questions. It follows the pattern established by intelligent hauntings in which the entity retains autonomy and agency, appearing according to its own purposes rather than the desires of those attempting to document it. This pattern matches everything known about Jean Lafitte's character during life: autonomous, strategic, cooperative when it served his interests, and utterly unwilling to submit to authority he did not respect. The geographic distribution of the sightings corresponds precisely to the documented territory of Lafitte's living operations. He appears in New Orleans, in the bayous, along the Gulf Coast, in every location that mattered to him during the years when he dominated maritime commerce in the region. The pattern suggests a spirit that maintains relationship to place rather than being confined to a single structure or object. Jean Lafitte claimed the Gulf of Mexico as his operational area when he lived. His ghost suggests he has not relinquished that claim. The absence of aggression in the encounters distinguishes Lafitte's haunting from phenomena associated with violent or traumatic passings. Witnesses report surprise, sometimes fear of the uncanny, but never threat. The apparition does not pursue, does not manifest hostility, does not create the oppressive atmospheric conditions associated with negative entities. It appears, observes, and departs. This pattern matches the code by which Lafitte operated during life, dangerous when necessary, but governed by rules he defined and followed consistently. New Orleans has claimed Jean Lafitte completely. The city named Pirates Alley for him, preserving the connection between the man and the place where he negotiated with civil authority. The blacksmith shop bears his name. The Jean Lafitte National Historical Park and Preserve protects the bayou landscape through which he moved contraband and men. The city treats him as one of its own, a figure who embodied the complex relationship between law and necessity that has always characterized New Orleans culture. He saved the city when it needed saving. The city remembers. Whether Jean Lafitte's spirit genuinely walks through the locations of his former life, or whether the phenomenon represents something else entirely, something about collective memory and cultural preservation that manifests in ways that appear paranormal, remains unresolved. What documentation confirms is that witnesses across nearly 2 centuries report consistent encounters with an apparition that matches historical descriptions of Jean Lafitte, appearing in locations he frequented during life, manifesting in ways that suggest intelligence and autonomy rather than residual energy or random occurrence. The pirate who disappeared without a documented death has become the ghost who never leaves, still present in the city he defended and the waterways he knew better than any chart could show. He appears in his alley and his bar and his bayou, wherever the wind carries the scent of the Gulf, and the light has that particular quality found only in Louisiana. Jean Lafitte came home to New Orleans in 1815 and saved it from invasion. The evidence suggests he has never truly left. If you found this case compelling, subscribe to Vanishing Roads for more documented paranormal investigations from around the world. This story was created with AI assistance based on documented case files. All events reference real investigations and reported incidents.